Hey everyone, so originally I wanted to do this video last week as soon as I got in my copy of Kind of Blue, the UHQR version, and it felt like there was a lot of energy around that and a lot of people were putting their videos up as well. Mine didn't come in when it was supposed to, and then I was out of town for the holiday weekend, and I'm only just getting to it. But actually, I think that this is probably a good thing because it's given me a little bit more time to kind of digest and do maybe even a broader comparison between this latest version of Miles Davis's Kind of Blue and some of the other versions that are out there. Because I think previously I probably was just going to talk about the the new release. So what I wanted to do is talk about this this new release. So for those who don't know, although I think probably most of us do, Kind of Blue was released in this UHQR version on 33 RPM. Previously, they put out 25,000 copies. I think it was about $100, and it came out, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago. I'm not sure. And I intentionally held off on picking that up. And the reason why was because I knew that at the same time they said that there was going to be a 45 RPM version, and I thought, if I'm going to shell out the money, I don't need both of them, and so I might as well wait. And so cut to now, the 45 RPM version finally was released. And what I'd like to do is talk about it in comparison with the Mobile Fidelity release, which is a 45 RPM stereo version. It came out in 2015. And that is, which one is that? That one's right here. Then I also have an original mono, which is right here. Actually, the only one out of the four that's in mono. So maybe this is going to be a little bit sort of unfair. I also actually have the 1995 Classic Records edition, which is right here. That is a 33 RPM in stereo, for the most part 33 RPM, because actually side D of the second disc is a alternate take of flamenco sketches, and that's in 45 RPM. And then finally the UHQR, which is right here. So gonna kind of run down, I guess, some of the differences that I hear in spinning these records, and just try to get at not only a comparison in terms of, like, you know, what is the listening experience, but then also which do I prefer, because actually there's a clear winner across these four, and frankly it's probably not even close. So yeah, let's get into it. All right, so let's talk about the Mobile Fidelity release first. So again, this is in 45 RPM. It is a stereo version. It was released in 2015, and you know, obviously Mobile Fidelity has been talked about quite a bit lately, and they're kind of under fire for, you know, their sort of, you know, practices in terms of using actually using a full analog process versus having digital in the channel, or in the chain, excuse me, and I think that I can talk about this actually independent of all that. And the reason why I say that is because I only own two Mobile Fidelity releases. And in fact, this is the first one that I picked up quite some time ago. More recently, I picked up In a Silent Way. And I don't, you know, I'm not a sort of a diehard fan of Mobile Fidelity. You know, I wasn't one of those folks who were picking up two copies of everything, you know, one to play, one to keep. But I also don't really feel like the fact that if there is digital in the chain, that's a huge problem. Like I don't feel as much of a purist, even though obviously I listen to vinyl quite a bit. But I don't feel enough of a purist to actually be super critical, I guess, of MoFi, although obviously they're you know, this idea that they've sort of lied to customers. I mean, obviously that's a problem. But in terms of actually comparing this, I don't think that I don't have bias. And so diving right into the Mobile Fidelity release, and I'll preface this by saying everything that I'm going to say is in comparison almost to the UHQR, which I'm going to talk about at the end. So generally speaking, this Mobile Fidelity release really lacks the depth of the UHQR. And I guess tangibly what I mean when I say depth is really the space around the notes. The music sort of feels almost like one-dimensional a little bit in comparison with UHQR. And so when I say that there isn't space, it's hard to get a sense of sort of room noise. There isn't as much sort of detail in sustains, especially in terms of the bass as well as the drums. And in fact, I actually found it's hard to hear the bass in some of the lower registers compared to the UHQR. And generally, it just didn't feel as engaging. This release was actually the only one that I turned up the volume more so than any of the rest of them. And that's not necessarily a problem to sort of master it quieter, and maybe some people would argue that that's actually preferable. But it was because I felt like I was missing something, and when I turned it up, I didn't get what I was looking for, and that is a problem, I think. So a few other notes: the piano is harder to hear. Like I said, there's not as much separation between the instruments. Miles does actually sound really good. It doesn't feel like he's quite as detailed still as the UHQR. When notes stop, when air stops blowing through a horn on this record, the sound stops as well. And there doesn't seem to be that kind of tail or that sort of trail of sound that you want to hear. And when you talk about sort of detailed sound, what you're looking for is that, right? It's the fingers on the bass, it's the breaths that the musicians take before blowing into a horn, it's the sustains, and it's the sound of the room, getting a sense of the studio. And in comparison with the UHQR, I feel like this MoFi just doesn't hold up. All right, next up is the original. So this is an original mono, and I'll say this: it's hard not to, sort of have warm and fuzzies with this particular recording, because I think probably for most of us, the first time we've ever heard this, I don't want to say the first time you've ever heard it was an original mono, but if you've been collecting jazz records, then most people make a point of finding either an original mono or an original stereo. And really up until, 2020, up until the pandemic, probably, you could still get these for not that much. Even a really nice copy, like a VG++ or Excellent, or even a near mint copy, you didn't have to spend that much. You could get them for like $100 tops. So they were so available because they made so many, because it's such a great record. And when most of us think about this record, we're kind of, even if you don't consciously do this, you're comparing it to the original mono. So that being said, the original mono, just by its very nature of being an old record, has a noise floor. And I'm not talking about like my copy being, in bad condition. I'm just talking about like there actually being a noise floor, like a little bit of sort of constant noise that these later reissues were able to remove. And so that is a little bit of a bummer, but at the same time, there's plenty to enjoy about the original mono, and that kind of stands out, that still makes it great. So I mentioned earlier, this is a little bit of an unfair comparison because this is the only mono in this shootout of the four. But what can you do? So this is just what I have access to. So what I will say about this is that this version seems to be, I don't want to say flat, because I don't want that to be misconstrued with me just saying that it's mono. And of course there isn't stereo separation, right? I'll say this: Miles is more muted in this than in the reissues. It feels like it was a priority when they were putting out the reissues to actually make him more pronounced, make his trumpet more pronounced. In this recording, his tone isn't quite as bright. The cymbals, however, on the other hand, are actually more pronounced than in some of these others. And this is an interesting thing to note, because in so many of the Tone Poets and the Impulse, was it the 60th anniversary series? I think I got that right. Where they bring out the cymbals quite a bit more. Here, actually, in the original, it feels like the cymbals are actually quite a bit more pronounced. The piano actually does feel louder, but less detailed than the MoFi version. So in addition to the piano being louder, I actually found specifically on the track So What, and I think this is just an example because this kind of carries through as well. Coltrane's solo on So What sounds much brighter than on the MoFi, and maybe even brighter than on the UHQR, to such a degree that it actually it sounds like it's a better solo, if that makes any sense. I mean, obviously it can't because it's the same solo, right? But it is so dynamic and so clear, and feels like it has so much energy in this original recording. I think if there's anything that the original mono stands out in, funnily enough, is maybe not Miles necessarily as much as the saxophones, and specifically Coltrane. All right, next up, 1995 Classic Records release. This is a, again, 33 RPM in stereo. There are 2 discs here. So what they did with disc 1 is both A and B is just the original, it's the, their version of the original stereo recording. Then on side C, or the first side of disc 2, they have they have side A again, but at the corrected speed. So I think a lot of people know this, right? That they originally put out this record with the incorrect speed, and so 1995 Classic Records, I think, was the first time that they made an effort to actually correct that. That's one of the reasons why I picked this up. I thought it would be interesting to finally hear this record or this music at the speed it was intended. And then side D is actually a alternate take of flamenco sketches, and they have that at 45 RPM. And this is certainly the first time I've had a record where on one side it's 33 and on the other it's 45. So where this record stacks up, first of all, it sounds great. Don't get me wrong, and I've had this record for quite some time and been enjoying it quite a bit. My one complaint that I have with this release, and I'll say this is an area where the MoFi as well as the UHQR stand out compared to this release. The stereo separation on this record is too separate. So where I feel like MoFi and UHQR were able to better represent sort of the feel of the studio, right? Where, yes, you might have Coltrane in the left channel, but he plays and you can kind of hear a little bit of that noise almost bouncing off the room, or picked up on the other mic. On this record, it feels like they just kept the 2 channels a little bit too contained. Obviously, you're still going to have Miles in the center, but in terms of the saxophonists, I think it's Coltrane in the left and Cannonball on the right, and then as well as the rhythm section, it feels like they're simply too separate. Oddly enough, I will say, speaking of Cannonball, that he sounds really, really good on this pressing. And so it's interesting where I mentioned the original mono and Coltrane sounds great. I feel like on this one, there's something about the way that they sort of treated Cannonball here, where he just sounds really, really good, maybe even better than on the UHQR. Honestly, I'd have to do a lot of back and forth to confirm that, and I'm not really prepared to do it. But I do think that this is a solid release. Generally speaking, I would say that this is better, more enjoyable than the Mobile Fidelity overall. I'd also say it's more enjoyable than the original mono. I really think that this Classic Records release has been solid, and like I said, I've enjoyed it for some years now. But at the end of the day, we also have the UHQR. All right, so this is what the UHQR looks like. This is the 45 RPM version as opposed to the 33, which I think looks exactly the same. Like there's some minor differences inside in terms of the booklet, but generally speaking, they look almost exactly the same, I think. So I want to sort of, I feel like I always have to temper my my comments when something like this that's brand new comes out, right? And there's always a lot of excitement around new stuff, especially in this hobby, right? It's always about the next thing rather than all of these things that we have on our shelves, which is really unfortunate. But My reaction so far to this record, or records, because it's a double disc, just owning it for a few days and spinning it a few times, is this is just head and shoulders above any other release of this music that I've heard. It doesn't feel close in terms of how good it sounds. Many of the things that I mentioned earlier, talking about sort of the pros and cons of some of these other records were in comparison to the UHQR, and so you probably know what I'm getting at in terms of my reaction to this record. But the stereo separation, the sort of sonic detail, the the sort of the room noise, right? Like everything about this record just seems to have really come together. They've really maximized every area that they possibly can in order to make this sound as good as it does. I think that I heard bass notes on this recording that I've never heard before, like on previous versions of Kind of Blue. And I do have a subwoofer in here that I turned down especially low, but and I made sure to have everything at the same level as I'm listening to these records, with the exception of, what was it? I think it was the MoFi, where I said I had to turn it up a little bit. But I was shocked to sort of hear something new, right? That I hadn't heard before. Even sort of the plucking of the strings that I mentioned this earlier, is something that there's so much detail around these little subtleties. And I don't listen to music just to hear the non-music portion of it, right? The breaths and the plucking of the strings and stuff like that. But when they get that right, that they're getting the detail around the notes, around the attacks, the sustains, the all of that is it just really sounds as good as it possibly can. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that this might be the best sounding record in my entire collection. And I've only recently gotten into these sort of audiophile treatments of records, but whether it's those audiophile reissues, or whether it's the several thousand original jazz records that I have, this might truly be the best sounding record. And it's frankly, it's shocking how good it sounds. And don't get me wrong, I have a nice setup, but I don't have like a crazy setup. There's plenty of people who spend way more money, who have way better equipment. I mean, my cartridge is $120 or something. I mean, I'm not on this crazy setup that some folks have with their $1,000 cartridges and everything. And the fact that I can hear as much of this sort of quality of the music come out and really stand out on this record on my setup, I think is really incredible. So I'm a huge fan already of this UHQR. Excited to wait for the 45 RPM. I have heard the 33 RPM. It was at a friend's house and on his setup, so I can't really compare it. To me, this sounds better in my room than the 33 did in his room, and he has a better setup than mine. So there's that. But if I was going to rank these, I probably shouldn't. But I mean, I think where I stand on this, right? It's the UHQR, then it's probably the classic records, then it's the original, probably the original mono, and then the MoFi. And it almost seems like I was setting everything up just to put MoFi last, given everything that's going on. I swear that was not my intention. That's just simply where we ended up with this particular record. So really interested to know what everybody else thinks about this latest UHQR. If you hear the same things that I do, or if you think that maybe one of these other pressings, either that I have or that you have that I don't, actually stands out maybe a little bit more than the UHQR. So let me know in the comments, and otherwise, thanks very much. I appreciate your attention, and like and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.